Starting from 1999, there have been 18 characters in the digital circus, 12 of whom have already become abstracted. So today we are going to talk about who each of them was, how and when they ended up inside the digital circus, what the real reason behind each of their abstractions actually is, and of course, who besides Ribbit might make an appearance in the final episode. Before we get into the video, I want to clarify a few things. The abstracted characters will be divided into main ones and secondary ones, so to speak. We also have 4 abstracted characters we know almost nothing about, and everything said about them will simply be my own theory. And with all of that said, let us begin. The show creators announced this character even before the pilot episode was released. However, his absence in the Meet the Gang segment gave fans a strange feeling right up until the pilot dropped, where we found out that Kaufmo had turned into an abstracted monster. Kaufmo is a clown, which is basically one of the default character forms inside the digital circus, and it is actually pretty symbolic that he was replaced by a character from that same category, Pomni. So far, there is no exact confirmed information on when he first appeared in the digital circus. However, the most believable version places it in 2013. In episode 7, during the presentation of the escape plan that Abel had come up with, you could notice a small fragment showing the names of characters who had previously worked at CNA, and Kaufmo is listed there too. This is actually a really important detail that will help us figure out the true reason behind his abstraction. But let us go through everything step by step.
In the pilot episode, we only saw his cardboard cutout, while for the rest of the time, he was already in the terminal stage of abstraction. His room will also become important a bit later, but for now, let us listen to what the circus residents were saying about Kaufmo. From their words, we already understand that Kaufmo was a pretty cheerful character who was always trying to lift the spirits of others, make them laugh, or offer support in whatever way he could. However, not many people truly appreciated that support the way it deserved to be appreciated. Also in episode 2, we were shown the memorial scene, and you can notice that even though not many people genuinely laughed at Kaufmo's jokes, he was still a meaningful part of the group, and his abstraction caused real sadness and grief among everyone who remained. We can see that when Kaufmo was around others, he was always smiling and projecting happiness. However, this is where the classic problem with characters like him becomes clear. Behind the mask of constant joy and humor, there is often a deeply struggling person underneath. I am certain the same thing was happening with Kaufmo. And all of that was made significantly worse by several factors. His history working at CNA, the surface-level response he received from the others, the abstraction of Ribbit, and his relentless obsession with finding a way to leave the digital circus.
As a former CNA employee, Kaufmo most likely had a solid understanding of what kind of technology the company was actually developing. And considering that he ended up inside the digital circus as one of the later employees to arrive, I have a theory that he began asking questions about what happened to the people who came before him and where they had disappeared to. And in response, the leadership of CNA decided to show him firsthand exactly what this company had been hiding all along. If my theory about 2013 is accurate, and we know for certain that the current events in the show take place in 2017, then Kaufmo managed to survive inside the digital circus for approximately 4 years. And throughout every single one of those years, he was obsessively trying to crack the mystery of how to escape. Remembering what Kinger told us, we understand that Kaufmo had recently begun distancing himself from the rest of the group. And all of that behavior is directly connected to that same search for an exit, which we see referenced heavily throughout his room. Kaufmo was completely consumed by the idea of finding a way out of the circus. On one hand, all of his drawings suggest that he never managed to find the solution he was looking for. However, pay close attention to one particular image, which looks suspiciously similar to the events that unfold in episode 8. What if Kaufmo had actually figured out how to escape the digital circus and was preparing to share that knowledge with everyone? But Kane found out about it, and using his ability to manipulate the minds of the characters, he slowly began pushing Kaufmo closer and closer to the edge. Kaufmo was already in a fragile mental state.
He was unable to find genuine friendships because even within his closest group, he always felt like the odd one out. The loss of Ribbit, the loss of so many others before her, all of it created the perfect foundation to destroy the mind of a character who was already mentally vulnerable and had been spending years searching desperately for something he could never quite reach.
That ended up being quite a detailed breakdown of Kaufmo, but it was genuinely important to go through. Besides, a lot of fans have already forgotten about this character over time. The others will be shorter, I promise. Queenie was among the very first characters to end up inside the digital circus. Her first appearance, just like the rest of the original cast, was in 1999. Queenie is Kinger's wife, and he holds only the warmest memories of her. She was funny, creative, and deeply passionate about entomology. Kinger himself mentioned that he used to dislike insects, but she somehow managed to change that for him. On top of that, in episode 8, we were shown the moment Kinger and Queenie first encountered each other inside the digital circus, a scene filled with genuine emotion and quiet devastation. By this point in the story, we already have more than enough information to understand who Queenie truly was as a person. She was kind and cheerful. She was deeply loving. But most importantly, she was an extraordinary partner who was always willing to support her husband no matter what the situation was, while also remaining remarkably grounded and rational throughout everything. I already mentioned that Queenie arrived in the digital circus in 1999. However, I find myself more curious about how she ended up there in the first place. She does not appear on the list of former CNA employees, and Kinger himself directly stated that her being there was his fault. My theory is that originally CNA had no intention of using their employees as subjects. However, those who knew too much, or those who were beginning to ask too many questions, were essentially punished by being sent into the digital circus. Perhaps Kinger brought Queenie to the CNA facility to show her the new technology the team had developed. But the critical problem was that Kinger had absolutely no idea what the real goal of CNA's leadership actually was. And that lack of awareness ultimately led to Queenie's consciousness being transferred into the digital world known as the Amazing Digital Circus. We know that Kinger and Queenie spent a long stretch of time as the only two residents inside the digital circus together. My theory places that period at approximately 3 years, which would put Queenie's abstraction in 2007. And knowing that timeline, we can only deepen our appreciation for Queenie as a truly resilient and emotionally strong individual who held on for as long as humanly possible. Living inside the digital circus for that many years, with only each other and Kane's relentless adventures as company, must have been an experience that defies description. But her deep love for Kinger was what kept delaying the inevitable for as long as it did. After years of that existence, her mental state simply could not hold any longer. Even Kinger, who knew her better than anyone, could not stop what was coming. Just like with Kaufmo, I am absolutely certain that memories of Queenie will surface in episode 9. Recently, I made a full dedicated video on Ribbit, covering every detail in depth. So today, let us keep this brief and focus on the key points. Ribbit appears on the list of former CNA employees, which leads me to believe she had genuine knowledge of what the company was actually working on behind closed doors. And this makes her line from the episode 9 trailer land with an entirely different weight. Have you ever done something that you regret? What if with those words, Ribbit is trying to hint to Jax and to us as the audience that she fully understood what CNA was doing and that she carries deep regret over it? It is very possible that she considered exposing the company to the authorities or the media. And because of that threat to their secrecy, the company's leadership made the decision to send her into the digital circus permanently.
Spike is a purple toy dinosaur who, based on both his concept art and his appearance in episode 8, was carrying an enormous amount of depression from the very moment he arrived. He is unique in that his design functions as one complete unified toy, and I could not identify a clear counterpart for him in the current cast. The reason for his abstraction requires very little analysis. He was never able to find a way to adapt the way Pomni eventually did. The sadness just accumulated, quietly, steadily, until there was nothing left. Wormo remains one of the most quietly heartbreaking characters in this entire timeline. His final design, no arms, no legs, put him at an immediate and severe disadvantage in a place where physical participation in adventures was the primary means of survival and distraction. I believe Wormo suffered from a form of body dysmorphia so severe that the system, interpreting his psychological relationship with his physical form, simply removed all the elements he could not accept. If Zubal's situation shows us body dysmorphia as a constant search for the right configuration, Wormo's situation shows us what happens when that search reaches its most extreme conclusion. Ratty was the smallest character in the entire history of the Digital Circus, and in many ways functions as an earlier mirror of Ragatha, a small plush character projecting constant cheerfulness while carrying something much heavier underneath. The detail that both Ratty and Ragatha share an issue with one of their eyes feels too deliberate to be coincidental. Finally, the four characters we know the least about: Bee, Cyclops, Oyster, and Clowny. Cyclops arrived in 2009 and abstracted in 2011. Clowny was in the circus from 2009 to 2010. Bee from 2011 to 2013. Oyster from 2012 to 2014. All of them were ordinary people who found themselves inside the Digital Circus essentially by accident. None of them had the background, the knowledge, or the emotional tools to process what had happened to them. And the slow, accumulating realization that they would have to remain inside this world indefinitely drove each of them toward the only outcome the circus offers those who cannot hold on. I am certain that in the final episode we will get significantly more exploration of the main abstracted characters, while the secondary ones may surface briefly in the background of someone's memory without taking center stage. As always, I will be waiting for you in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.
Spike is a purple toy dinosaur who, based on both his concept art and his appearance in episode 8, was carrying an enormous amount of depression from the very moment he arrived. He is unique in that his design functions as one complete unified toy, and I could not identify a clear counterpart for him in the current cast. The reason for his abstraction requires very little analysis. He was never able to find a way to adapt the way Pomni eventually did. The sadness just accumulated, quietly, steadily, until there was nothing left. Wormo remains one of the most quietly heartbreaking characters in this entire timeline. His final design, no arms, no legs, put him at an immediate and severe disadvantage in a place where physical participation in adventures was the primary means of survival and distraction. I believe Wormo suffered from a form of body dysmorphia so severe that the system, interpreting his psychological relationship with his physical form, simply removed all the elements he could not accept. If Zubal's situation shows us body dysmorphia as a constant search for the right configuration, Wormo's situation shows us what happens when that search reaches its most extreme conclusion. Ratty was the smallest character in the entire history of the Digital Circus, and in many ways